4 feet long. It's 8 feet wide, except in places where it's a little bit wider. It encompasses 43,732 square feet. It's supported by 116 6x6 number 2 pines, sunk about 4 feet in, and it went on and on and on for $300. So, I mean, this is a very, very thorough study that they did for us. I'm going to take just one of these 20 areas there and just show you what they did and how they do it when they do their reserve study. This is the clubhouse pool area. Now again, this is just one of the 20 different items that they looked at. The reserve item for clubhouse pool, spa resurface, pool deck pavers, pool fence, geothermal heat pumps, geothermal well pumps, geothermal control system, geothermal piping, pool furniture, pool cabana roof, pool cabana paint exterior, pool cabana paint interior, pool cabana restroom refurbishment, maintenance shed roof, maintenance shed exterior paint, pool equipment. So what they do on these, they determine the current cost when new. So if they had to replace this item, the spa resurface, if they had to do it today, it would cost $3,640 to do it. In 1 year, we'll need to do that resurfacing. Expected life when new, 10 years. First replacement cost, so we have 1 year, estimated remaining life is 1 year on that item, and at that time it's going to cost us $3,826 to do that. You'll notice that's different than the cost here because for each year they put in an inflation factor of 2.5%. So some things that go many years, for instance, let's look at the pool deck pavers here, $103,460. We got 5 years before we have to do anything with that, but when we do, it's going to cost $120,185. Okay, they did this at this level of detail for all 20 of the items that I showed you. You can see there's a few items on here that cost as little as $543 to paint the exterior of the cabana, $870, $336 for this item. Usually when you do a reserve study, you put a bottom limit on something, maybe $5,000, $10,000. When they came in and did the study, there was no bottom limit, so they have things as small as $336 on there. So, what they do in that study then, they figure out for each item, for each category, each of those 20 categories, and each of these items, next year, how many items are we going to have to replace, and what's that cost going to be? The year after that, 2015, what's that item, and what's the cost going to be? The thing that we were missing then was a review of the golf course. So Paul got with Troon Golf, and Troon Golf did a reserve item analysis for the golf course, which included the championship course greens, the executive course greens, the tee boxes, bunkers, the pump house and all the pumps and valves within it, and the cart paths. And they did the same kind of study as what the firm did that came in and did the big study. Then the finance committee took both of those studies and combined them and did the dollars and cents on what it's going to cost us to fund the reserves, how much we're going to spend each year on those reserves, and how our reserve fund is going to grow. So if you bear with me a little bit on this one, we're going to start out in year 2013 with, that's the end of this year, we're going to start out with $676,000 in our reserve fund. That number's a little bit low. It's probably going to be about $20,000 more than that, but I like to be conservative, plus I made this slide up over a month ago. So for 2014 then, we expect a monthly reserve, we're recommending a monthly reserve payment of $28 per home. Number of homes, 1321. Our yearly reserve payment then would be $443,856 for next year. And we're going to spend $187,599. So if you take this 676 that we're starting with, You add the 443,856 that we're going to collect during the year of 2014, subtract the 187,599 that we have to spend for those items that have been identified. That'll leave us at the end of the year with 932,257 in the reserve fund. I'm not going to go through the rest of this table, but you can see as each year the reserve spending, well, let's see, each year the reserve payment is going to go up slightly. And that's because we're going to have more homes. We're selling more homes, so we're collecting more per home, and that's going to increase the number that we're getting in. The amount that we're spending each year varies, and sometimes it varies greatly. As you can see down here for 2017, we have a reserve spending of $700,525. Nearly $500,000 of that is projected to be spent to redo the greens on the golf course. So even with that, we're still going to be at the end of that year, we're still going to be at $1.3 million. The next year, we're hardly spending anything, relatively speaking. Our reserve is going to end up at be 1.7. At the end of 2019, and this is as far as we went with our study, we'll be at about 1.8 million in our reserve fund. If you look on the President's Council page and look at the reserve study, it will tell you on there that we are presently 40% funded. That's considered to be fairly funded. Our goal is to be at 100% funded. Don't let the 40% funded scare you. Here's all that means. That means that over the next 8 to 10 years, if everything that we have in the reserve that we're supposed to spend over those next 10 years, if that all comes due at once, we only have enough to cover 40% of it. You know, that's not going to happen. Our goal is to get to 100% funded, and this kind of plan is going to keep us on that goal. So if anybody had any reservations about how well we're funded, how well our reserves are funded, I hope that allayed those reservations right now, because we're in very good shape and it's going to get better and better and better. Okay, so we do have another slide. This is the same slide that we showed at the first meeting last month. How are we going to pay for this? In May of 2014, we project to have about 1.3 million in our operating fund, 734,000 in our reserve fund, and as I said before, it's going to be more than that. From the state of Florida, we're receiving about 890,000, and that should happen within the next, I don't know, few weeks possibly, which would give us a total of about $2.9 million when you add up the reserves, the operating fund, and what we get from the state. Now, our budget is $1.9 to about $2 million to do this proposed expansion and update of the building. If we use $700,000 from the operating fund, 0 from the reserve fund, $600,000 from that we're going to receive from the state of Florida, that would leave us with about $1.3 million that we could spend for this. In order to do $1.9 million, we would have to borrow $600,000, and we're projecting now that current rate is probably going to be about 5.5%, and it's a loan I have here for 5 years, but it's really a 5/15, which means it's amortized for 15 years, but it becomes due in 5 years. Okay, so at the end of the 5 years, we would have to refinance part of that. The monthly payment on that would be $4,902. Yearly payment would be $58,842. So when that loan becomes due, our present loan, which will be about $2.02 million at that time, we do have a mortgage on this place, and when it becomes due, will be in February of 2019, a little over $2 million. The current loan of $600,000, we have about $454 left on that. So at that point, we would have both these loans ballooning at the same time to the tune of about $2.5 million. So we would have to refinance, and anybody that can tell me what the finance rate is going to be then is probably crazy, so don't raise your hand. We know they're going up. Probably the lowest they're going to be in many of our lifetimes. I want to stress one figure over here. We're not touching reserves. We also need to keep, out of this 1.3 million in the operating fund, we need to keep about 600,000 in that fund. That is really not cash on hand. That is an operating fund that's used to keep the place going. We've had as low as a couple $100,000 in that fund, but the Finance Committee has determined that it's a very safe number is 600,000. We a lot of times have accounts receivables of about 300,000. We have insurance payments coming due that are about 80,000 or 65,000. We have property taxes coming due of about 80,000. So that fund, we recommend that number stay right around 600,000. It could possibly be lower than that, but if we get lower than that, then our risk becomes greater that there may be an assessment. And the last thing I want to do is have another assessment on anything in here. We're trying to keep our monthly assessments the same, and we're trying real hard to stay away from special assessments. So we have a padding here that will keep us safe and to keep us low risk. We have a very, very strong reserve fund that will keep us at low risk. So we're in good shape. We're in very good shape. And before I close on this, I always am the one that has to talk about numbers and everything, and I see people's eyes glazing over and all that stuff. So I'm going to tell a joke. There's an Indian tribe, and the chief dies in the Indian tribe, and his son is made chief. And his son is not real wise in the ways of the Indians because he's been away at school and getting his college degree and everything. So the very first meeting, all the people in the tribe say, well, Chief, what should we do about the coming winter? And the chief says, well, let's go out and gather firewood so we have enough to keep us warm for the winter. So everybody in the tribe goes out and they gather firewood, they bring it back. A couple days later, the chief says, you know, I'm going to call the National Weather Service and see what they say about the winter. So he calls the National Weather Service and they said, yeah, it looks like a cold winter. So the chief calls everybody together again and says, we're going to need more firewood. It looks like it's a pretty cold winter. So they go out and they gather more firewood and bring it back. A couple days later, he calls the National Weather Service again. He says, well, how's it look for the winter now? And the guy at the National Weather Service says, well, you know, it looks like it's going to be a very cold winter. So he calls everybody together again and says, go out and get every stick of firewood you can find. So they go out and they bring back all this firewood. A couple days later, he calls the National Weather Service. What do you think about the winter? It's going to be the coldest winter on record. And she says, well, how do you know that? He says, are you nuts? The Indians are gathering firewood like crazy. Thank you, David.
That ended with a joke because my eyes were glazing over. Not to minimize the money thing, but if you could all just kind of wrap your heads back around what Sarah was talking about. Something that I often say to architects is that you make it look beautiful and I'll make it work. So Mike and Sarah and their team will make your club look beautiful. Fishman and Associates, CJ Fishman and I will make sure that it works. I'm sure all of you have been to a restaurant at least once in your life that looked gorgeous. You were very excited to go there, brand new, grand opening or whatnot, and you have terrible service, or your food is cold, or the waitress is haggard. There's something wrong. That happens to me all the time, and of course I surmised that they didn't have a professionally designed kitchen. And those are the things that we prevent through the services that we offer. Now I know there's been questions about, well, how do you determine the space? And that is one of the very first things. It's not the very first thing. The first thing that we do that CJ Fishman and I did is we came in and we met with Paul and the chef and we toured your facility. We asked a lot of questions. We listened. And we heard what the nuts and bolts of the operation are, what they wanted the nuts and bolts of the operation to be. The main one being wanting to serve banquets and serve in the dining room simultaneously without there being any effect on the service and the quality of food. Once we determined that after listening quite a lot and asking questions, we came back with what we offered to be the recommended space. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have heard the formula of 30%, 40% of the dining space